They gave her a rusted bucket and a rag that reeked of old blood and fear. The kind of fear that settles into fabric and never quite leaves, no matter how many times you wash it. Seraphine's hands shook as she gripped the wooden handle, splinters biting into her calloused palms. "The Eastern Kennels," Beta Corwin said, not bothering to look at her. His voice carried the casual cruelty of a man who'd long ago stopped seeing certain people as people at all. "The feral wolves. Clean their cages before dawn, or I'll let them decide what to do with you." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Seraphine wanted to ask which would be worse, the wolf's judgment or his. But Wolfless Omegas did not ask questions. Wolfless Omegas did not speak unless spoken to. Wolfless Omegas picked up their buckets and their blood-soaked rags and descended into the dark because the alternative was worse. It was always worse. The Eastern Kennels sat beneath the main compound of Thornmire Pack, carved into the granite bones of the Bitterroot Mountains themselves. Montana winters were brutal here, where the Rockies scraped against the sky with jagged indifference, but the cold never quite reached the kennels. The heat came from below geothermal vents that made the stone sweat and the air thick with moisture. It smelled of iron and wet rock and something else, something wild and wrong, like madness given form. Seraphine descended the stairs one careful step at a time. The bucket banged against her shin with each footfall, sloshing gray water that had already gone cold. Somewhere in the darkness below, something growled. Not the warning growl of a wolf protecting its territory. This was different. This was the sound of a mind coming apart at the seams, unraveling thread by thread until only hunger and rage remained. She was not supposed to be here. No wolfless servant was. The Eastern Kennels held the feral wolves who had lost themselves to grief or madness, or the kind of violence that broke something fundamental inside a person. Wolves whose human halves had retreated so far inward that only teeth and instinct remained. Even ranked warriors avoided the pens after dark. The ferals were unpredictable, dangerous. 3 handlers had died down here in the last 18 months. The pack had stopped replacing them, but Seraphine was not ranked. She was not even registered, and Beta Corwin had decided that this would be her punishment for the crime of existing near him when his mood was foul and he needed something small to hurt. The stairs opened into a corridor lined with iron cages. Torchlight flickered against wet stone, casting shadows that moved like living things. The air was thick enough to choke on heavy, with the scent of unwashed bodies and old fear. In the nearest cage, a massive gray wolf lay on its side, ribs heaving beneath matted fur. One eye was swollen shut, crusted with dried blood. The other tracked her with the flat, assessing patience of a predator who had already decided you were not worth the effort of killing. Not yet, anyway. Seraphine set the bucket down at the edge of the cage. Her hands were steadier now. They always were when she was afraid. Fear had a way of sharpening her focus, narrowing the world down to the immediate and the survivable. She had learned that at 13, the night her father stopped speaking her name. She had perfected it over the 8 years since. "I'm just here to clean," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the drip of water from the ceiling, the distant growl of wolves deeper in the darkness. "I won't hurt you." The gray wolf's ear flicked, just once. A tiny acknowledgement that it had heard her, that some part of the human mind still trapped inside that broken body was listening. Seraphine knelt beside the cage and dipped her rag into the bucket. The water turned pink almost immediately as she scrubbed at the bars, working at layers of rust and dried blood, and the kind of neglect that spoke volumes about how little Thornmire Pack cared for its prisoners. The wolf watched her with its one good eye. She could feel the weight of that gaze like a hand pressed against her throat, testing measuring. She had been wolfless since birth, or at least since the age when a wolf should have stirred inside her and announced itself with the golden warmth that every other pup in the pack described in reverent, ecstatic terms. At 13, when the autumn moon rose full and heavy over the Bitterroot Peaks, Seraphine had stood in the ceremonial circle with 12 other children her age and waited for the change. One by one they had shifted, timber wolves sleek and powerful, their pelts ranging from silver gray to rich auburn. The transformations were awkward, painful, accompanied by cries that were half agony and half exultation. But when it was over, 12 young wolves stood in the circle, their eyes glowing with the fierce joy of the newly awakened. Seraphine had felt nothing. Just silence. Just the hollow, ringing emptiness that would define the rest of her life. Her mother had wept. Her father, Thomas Ashcroft, brother to Alpha Aldrich, and once part of a bloodline that commanded respect, had gone very still. The kind of still that meant something inside him had broken and would not be fixed. He had not spoken to her again. Not that night, not the next morning, not ever. Within a year, the family had been stripped of rank. The Ashcroft name still carried weight, but only because Aldrich allowed it and only because Thomas was his brother. Within 2 years, Seraphine had been moved from the family quarters to the servant wing, a windowless room that smelled of mildew and the decades of broken dreams that had seeped into its walls. Within 3 years, her father had petitioned Alpha Aldrich to have her removed from the pack registry entirely. She remembered that day with the crystal clarity reserved for moments that reshape your understanding of the world. She had been 14. Her father had stood before the Alpha in the great hall, surrounded by witnesses, and spoke the words that would sever her from everything she had ever known. She is a burden I cannot carry. A wolfless child has no place in a pack. I asked that her name be struck from our records. Alpha Aldrich had not hesitated, had not asked Seraphine if she understood what was happening, had not given her a chance to speak. He had simply nodded, and the pack scribe had drawn a line through her name in the registry, and that was that. Seraphine Ashcroft, wolfless Omega unaffiliated, a ghost in her own home. She had been 14 years old. Now she was 22, and she cleaned whatever they told her to clean. She kept her head down and her voice soft and carried a small gray river stone in her apron pocket like a talisman. She had found it the day after her father's petition, pulled it from the creek that ran behind the servant quarters because she had needed something, anything to hold on to, while the world confirmed that she was less than nothing. The stone was smooth and ordinary, worn by decades of water into a shape that fit perfectly in her palm. She touched it, now felt its familiar weight, and kept scrubbing. The gray wolf shifted. The movement was slow-labored, as though every muscle in its body screamed in protest. It dragged itself closer to the bars inch by painful inch. Seraphine froze rags suspended mid-stroke. The wolf's muzzle pressed through the gap between two iron bars, nostrils flaring. It was scenting her. Wolves did that. They read the world through smell, the way humans read through sight, layering information upon information until they built a picture of who you were and what you wanted, and whether you were prey or threat or something in between. Seraphine should have been terrified. Every survival instinct she had honed over 8 years of servitude screamed at her to run, to put distance between herself and this creature that could tear her throat out before she managed 2 steps toward the stairs. But the wolf's one open eye was not hungry. It was not angry. It was tired. And it was asking. She did not know how she knew that. She had no wolf to translate the language of growls and postures and the subtle shift of weight that spoke volumes to those who could hear it. But she knew, the same way she knew when a storm was coming, by the way the air pressure changed, the way she knew which servants could be trusted and which would sell her out for an extra ration of meat. She knew. Seraphine reached through the bars, slowly, carefully. Her hand trembled not with fear, but with the weight of what she was doing, the sheer audacity of touching a feral wolf that had been caged for months and left to rot in its own madness. Her fingers found the wolf's muzzle. The fur was coarse and hot-fevered. Beneath her palm, the wolf exhaled a long, shuddering breath that seemed to empty it of something terrible. Its one good eye closed. "You poor thing," Seraphine murmured. The words came without thought, soft and aching. "When did someone last touch you gently?" The wolf did not answer. Could not answer. But its breathing slowed, deepened, and for just a moment the madness receded enough that Seraphine could see the person trapped inside. Young, male, hurt in ways that had nothing to do with the scars marking his body. She did not hear the footsteps behind her, did not hear the sharp intake of breath from the figure standing at the top of the stairs cloaked in shadow and disbelief, did not know that the world had just tilted on its axis, that the scent rising from her skin rainwashed stone and crushed time, and something beneath both that was purely devastatingly her was the one scent the stranger had crossed 3 territories to find, his mate. Theron Ravenclaw had not intended to arrive at Thornmire in silence. He had intended fire and banners in the full ceremonial weight of the Lycan throne descending on a minor pack whose alpha had been suspiciously late with tributes for 3 consecutive seasons. $47,000. That was the deficit. Theron's accountants were meticulous, and they did not make mistakes. Aldrich Ashcroft owed the crown $47,000, and every instinct Theron possessed said the money had not simply vanished. It had been redirected, embezzled, hidden. Men who stole from the crown rarely did so out of sudden desperation. They did so because they had been doing it for years and had grown comfortable in their deception. Comfortable enough to get sloppy. But then he had crossed the border into Thornmire territory at dusk, and something had pulled at him. A restlessness in his wool, a tugging behind his ribs, that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with yearning. The kind of yearning that made men do stupid things. Theron was not a man given to impulse. 31 years of life, 12 of them spent consolidating his rule over 5 fractious territories, had beaten impulse out of him with brutal efficiency, but the pull was undeniable. So he had sent Commander Cadmus Ironheart and the guards ahead with orders to secure lodgings in Thornmeyer's main compound and wait for his arrival while he slipped through the eastern gate alone following a thread he could not name and did not understand. Now he stood at the top of the stairs leading to the eastern kennels, and the world had gone very, very quiet inside his head. She smelled of rain-washed stone and crushed time, and something beneath both that bypassed every defense he had ever built and settled into the marrow of his bones like it had always lived there. Like he had been searching for it his entire life without knowing what he was searching for, and now that he had found it, the absence of it would kill him. His wolf, the great black beast that had terrorized battlefields and silenced council chambers with a single snarl, was pressed flat against the floor of his consciousness, whimpering, "Mate, mate, mate." The word echoed through every corner of his mind, drowning out thought and reason and the 12 years of careful control that had kept the curse at bay. Because Theron Ravenclaw was dying, slowly, inevitably. The feral curse that ran in his bloodline, a poison legacy from an ancestor who had dabbled in magics no wolf should touch, was eating him alive. He had 6 months, maybe less. 6 months before the man inside him retreated so far into the dark that only the beast remained, and the beast would not stop until it had torn apart everything Theron had spent his life building. The only cure was a mate bond, true and complete, the kind of bond that happened once in a lifetime if you were lucky. Most wolves never found it. They settled for chosen mates partnerships built on respect and compatibility and the pragmatic understanding that love was optional, but pack stability was not. Theron had accepted that he would die alone, had made peace with it in the grim, methodical way he made peace with all unpleasant inevitabilities. He had named Cadmus. His successor had arranged for the transition of power to be as smooth as possible, had written letters to be opened after his death, explaining why he had not told anyone about the curse until it was too late to stop it. And now this slip of a girl, thin and underfed, wearing a servant's dress so threadbare he could see the bruises on her arms through the fabric, kneeling in front of a cage full of feral wolf and touching the creature's muzzle with the casual tendernesses of someone who had long ago stopped being afraid of pain, because pain was all she knew. The feral wolf in the cage. Finian Greywater, a border prisoner. Theron himself had ordered captured 2 months ago after a skirmish near the Idaho line, was leaning into her hand like a pup seeking its mother. Cadmus, Theron said. His voice came out rough, scraped raw. The commander had followed him down the stairs silent as death and now stood at Theron's shoulder with the kind of rigid stillness that meant he was fighting every instinct he possessed not to interfere. She's touching them, Cadmus breathed. All of them. They're letting her. She touches them because she's mine. The words came out of Theron in a voice he did not recognize. Low, raw, scraped from somewhere so deep it might have been the voice of his wolf itself. The growl beneath the words made the torches on the wall flicker, shadows dancing like startled birds. Cadmus took a step back. Not in fear, Cadmus had stood beside Theron through battles that would have broken lesser men, but in recognition. He knew what that tone meant. He knew what it cost Theron to use it. Theron descended the stairs. Seraphine heard him this time. The footsteps were not quiet. He made no effort to hide his approach, and the air in the kennels changed, thickened, as though the very stones recognized the presence of something larger than themselves and bent accordingly. She turned still on her knees, rag clutched in one hand, and looked up at the largest man she had ever seen. He was tall, impossibly oppressively tall, with shoulders that seemed engineered for the express purpose of carrying the weight of kingdoms. His hair was black cropped close to his skull in a style that suggested function over vanity. His face looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the mountains above them, all sharp angles and unforgiving lines, with a scar running from his left temple to his jaw. A scar that spoke of violence survived of battles won at terrible cost, but it was his eyes that stopped her breath in her throat. Amber, molten, inhuman. They burned with a light that had nothing to do with the torches on the wall and everything to do with the wolf in mod in him, the beast that was so close to the surface she could almost see it moving beneath his skin. Every wolf in the pens had gone silent. Not the silence of fear, though there was fear there too thick and choking. This was the silence of recognition, of submission. The silence of lesser predators acknowledging the presence of something at the top of the food chain, something that could kill them all without breaking a sweat and would not lose sleep over it. Seraphine did not have a wolf to tell her what she was looking at, had no instinct to translate the seismic authority radiating from this man's body like heat from a forge. But she understood power when she saw it, had learned to read it in the tilt of a head, the set of shoulders, the way people moved through space as though they owned it. This man did not just own the space. He owned the world. Who are you, she asked. Her voice came out smaller than she intended, barely louder than the drip of water against stone. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the exact line of that scar, the way it bisected his left eyebrow, and pulled the corner of his mouth into a permanent suggestion of a snarl. Close enough that she could smell him cedar and wood smoke, and something electric like the air before a storm. "Stand up," he said. The words were gentle. That was the most terrifying part. The gentleness coming from a man whose presence alone had flattened every wolf in the room into submission, whose eyes burned like molten gold, whose voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Seraphine stood. Her knees ached from kneeling on wet stone. The river stone in her pocket pressed against her thigh, a small hard comfort. He was close enough now that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, and the asymmetry of it, him towering over her. Her covered in grime and old blood, the caged wolves watching in breathless silence made her feel like she had stumbled into a story that was not hers, that she had no right to be part of. His hand came up, slowly, as though he were approaching one of the ferals, as though he understood that sudden movements meant danger, and he did not want to frighten her. His fingertips brushed her cheek, just the lightest pressure, and a sound escaped him. Not quite a word, not quite a growl, something broken and reverent, something that sounded like a man who had been holding his breath for his entire life and had just remembered how to exhale. "What is your name?" he asked. "Seraphine." It came out as a whisper. She did not know why she was whispering. Did not know why her heart was hammering in her chest, why her skin felt too tight, why the touch of his hand against her face sent electricity racing down her spine. "Who put you in this place, Seraphine?" Beta Corwin. She forced the words out past the tightness in her throat. "I'm wolfless. I clean where they tell me to." "You are not wolfless." He said it with such absolute certainty that she almost believed him, as though he could see something inside her that she had spent 22 years failing to find, as though the emptiness she had carried her entire life was not emptiness at all, but something hidden, something waiting. "And no one will ever tell you to clean another cage." Seraphine stared at him. The words did not make sense. They were arranged in an order she understood, spoken in a language she had known since birth, but they did not make sense because no one had ever said anything like them to her before. Not her mother, who had wept but ultimately accepted the verdict of the pack. Not her father, who had erased her from his life with surgical precision. Not any of the packmates who had watched her descend into servitude with the same vague discomfort one feels when passing a dead animal on the road. Unfortunate, but not their problem. This man, this terrifying man with molten eyes and a scar like a canyon carved down his face, was looking at her as though she were the most important thing in the room, in the building, in the world. "I don't understand," she said. "You will." His hand dropped from her face and she felt the absence of his touch like a sudden cold, like stepping from sunlight into shadow. "But not tonight. Tonight you come with me and you are safe and no one in this pack lays a hand on you again." Behind them in the cages, the wolves had begun to hum. It was a low harmonic vibration that was not quite a howl and not quite a song, but something older than both. It rose through the stone floor and into Seraphine's bones, and the hollow place inside her chest, the place she had long ago accepted as proof of her emptiness, resonated with it, as though it were not empty at all, as though it were an instrument that had simply been waiting all these years for the right note to be played. Alpha Aldrich Ashcroft learned of the Lycan King's arrival the way all men learn of disasters they should have seen coming too late, and from someone who was already afraid. The runner burst into his private study without knocking, ashen-faced, and stammering the words tumbling out in a rush that spoke of panic barely contained. The Lycan King was here, in Thornmire, unannounced. He had been seen in the eastern kennels speaking with a servant girl, and the wolves in the cages were silent. Not the silence of death, but the silence of submission. The kind of silence that meant something fundamental had shifted in the hierarchy of power, and everyone except Aldrich had already figured out what. Which servant? Aldrich was on his feet before the runner finished his wolf, surging with territorial anxiety. The study smelled of old leather and older whiskey, of the comfortable authority he had spent 20 years building. That authority felt suddenly fragile, like ice in spring, solid on the surface, rotten underneath. The wolfless one, Alpha. The runner swallowed hard. Seraphine. Aldrich's lip curled. The girl was an embarrassment. His brother's defective offspring, a stain on a bloodline that had once produced warriors of genuine renown. He had tolerated her existence only because killing a wolfless packmate, even one as worthless as her, would draw scrutiny from the Continental Council. The Council frowned upon casual murder, especially when the victim was young and female, and technically innocent of any crime beyond the genetic misfortune of being born broken. So instead, Aldrich had given her to the servants and forgotten her. The way one forgets a crack in a wall until the day it brings the whole structure down around your ears. Now the Lichen King was touching her face in Aldrich's dungeon, and every instinct Aldrich possessed, political, territorial, self-preservational, was screaming that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. He made another one in the Great Hall. Aldrich swept in flanked by 6 warriors, a show of strength so transparent it bordered on farce. But appearances mattered. In pack politics, they were often the only thing that mattered. The hall was ancient timber and trophy antlers, smelling of old feasts and older grudges. The kind of space designed to remind everyone who entered it that Thornmeyer Pack had history and weight and permanence. Seraphine had been brought along. The Lichen King had refused to leave her in the kennels, and she stood behind him now, small and bewildered, still holding the blood-stained rag. Her eyes pale violet, Aldrich noticed with a jolt. When had they been violet were too wide, too bright. She looked like a rabbit caught in torchlight, frozen between the instinct to run and the knowledge that running would only make the predator chase. The Lichen King stood in the center of the hall with his arms folded. Aldrich had seen Theron Ravenclaw once before 5 years ago at a Continental Council meeting where Aldrich had gone to argue for lower tribute rates. He had failed. Theron had listened with the patience of a man who had heard every argument 1,000 times before and found them all equally unconvincing. And then he had said no with such finality that Aldrich had not dared ask twice. Theron looked older now. There were lines around his eyes that had not been there 5 years ago, a tightness to his jaw that spoke of pain carried quietly. But the authority was the same, undeniable, absolute. The kind of power that did not need to announce itself because it existed in the space between words, in the weight of a glance, in the way lesser wolves press their shoulders back and tuck their chins without consciously deciding to do so. Your Majesty? Aldrich executed a bow that was precisely 1 degree too shallow. Not quite insubordinate, but close enough to establish that he was alpha here in his own hall and would not be cowed. Had we known of your visit, we would have prepared a welcome befitting. You would have hidden what I've seen. Theron's voice cut through the pleasantries like a blade through silk. He did not sit, did not move, just stood there with the kind of stillness that made the air feel heavier, harder to breathe. The state of those prisoners, the condition of your pack's lowest members, the girl. Aldrich's gaze flicked to Seraphine. She flinched just slightly, a movement so small most would have missed it. But Theron saw. Aldrich watched the king's eyes narrow, watched his hands curl into fists, and realized with dawning horror that he had stepped into a trap of his own making. The girl is wolfless, Your Majesty. Aldrich kept his voice measured, reasonable. She holds no rank, no bond, no value to. Choose your next words with extraordinary care, Alpha Aldrich. The temperature in the hall dropped, not metaphorically. Theron's dominance aura, the pressure that radiated from a Lichen King's wolf when it was displeased, had a physical weight. Warriors on both sides of the room pressed their shoulders back involuntarily, chins tucking bodies betraying their submission, even as their minds resisted. Aldrich felt it too, a crushing force that made his wolf whimper and scramble for cover. He fought it. Pride and desperation made him stupid, and he committed the error that would unravel everything. With respect, Your Majesty. Aldrich's voice was strained but defiant. He could feel Beta Corwin at his shoulder, could sense his mate Isolde behind him, and their presence gave him just enough false courage to keep talking when he should have shut his mouth. The girl is my packmate, under my jurisdiction. Whatever her state she is, Thornmeyer's concern, not the crown's. I will not have my authority over my own blood questioned in my own hall. He turned to Seraphine, looked directly at her for the first time in 8 years. She had grown taller, he noticed distantly. Still too thin, still marked with the kind of bruises that came from rough handling and rougher living. But her eyes, those unsettling violet eyes, met his without flinching, and something in them made his wolf recoil. Go back to the servant wing, Aldrich said. And because he was an idiot, because panic had stripped him of the minimal intelligence required to read a room, he put the full weight of an alpha command behind the words. Now, it was the kind of compulsion no packmate could resist. The alpha command was pack law made flesh, the dominance hierarchy encoded into wolf DNA and reinforced by 1,000 years of tradition. When an alpha spoke with that weight, the wolf inside you bowed. It had no choice. The human mind might resist, might scream and rage against the violation, but the wolf obeyed. Seraphine's body jerked. Her eyes went glassy, unfocused. She took a step backward toward the door, her fingers loosening on the rag. The small gray river stone she had been carrying slipped from her apron pocket and clattered against the flagstones, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Theron moved. He did not shift, though his wolf was howling for it. But the speed with which he crossed the distance between himself and Seraphine was not human. One moment he was in the center of the hall. The next he was beside her, his hand on her arm steady and warm and immovable. The Alpha command shattered. It did not fade or weaken or gradually release its hold. It shattered, exploding against the wall of Theron's presence like glass thrown against stone. Seraphine gasped, the compulsion releasing her so suddenly that her knees buckled. Theron caught her one arm around her waist, holding her upright, while she gulped air and tried to remember how to think. "You just used an Alpha command," Theron said to Aldrich. His voice was the quietest it had been all night, which meant it was the most dangerous. "On an unarmed, wolfless girl, in front of the Lycan King, to force her to walk away from my protection." Aldrich's face went white, not pale, white. The color of a man who has just realized he has made a mistake so profound, so catastrophically stupid, that there is no walking it back. That, Theron said, was a mistake. Seraphine, pressed against the Lycan King's side, felt the growl that rolled through his chest. She felt it in her teeth, in her bones, in some dark and dormant place inside her that stirred for the first time in 22 years. Like something waking from a very long sleep. Like something that had been waiting. The night blurred after that. Seraphine had fragmentary memories being escorted from the Great Hall, the whispers that followed in her wake, the way pack members pressed themselves against walls to avoid being too close to her, as though proximity to someone the Lycan King claimed might be dangerous, as though she had stopped being invisible and become instead something radioactive. Theron commandeered the guest quarters in Thornmeyer's main compound, a pointed humiliation that was not lost on anyone. Aldrich's best rooms, usually reserved for visiting dignitaries, were stripped and cleaned and assigned to the king and his retinue. Commander Cadmus Ironheart moved through the process with military efficiency, securing the wing posting, guards making it clear that these rooms were now sovereign territory, and anyone who entered without permission would regret it. They gave Seraphine a room of her own. It had a window. She stood in front of it for 10 minutes, just staring because she had not had a window in 8 years. The servant quarters were all interior spaces carved into the mountain's heart, where sunlight never reached. She had forgotten what it felt like to see the schema. "You should rest," Theron said from the doorway. He had not left her side since the hall had walked beside her through Thornmeyer's corridors with the kind of protective intensity that made her feel simultaneously safe and terrified. "There's food if you're hungry, water, clean clothes." Seraphine turned from the window. He filled the doorway completely. This man who had appeared in her life like a force of nature and upended everything she thought she understood about her place in the world. "I don't understand what's happening," she said. The words came out steadier than she felt. "I know." Theron stepped into the room but did not approach. He moved like a man conscious of the space he occupied, of how his size and presence could be overwhelming. "I'll explain tomorrow, but tonight you need to know 3 things. He held up one finger. "You are not wolfless." A second finger. "You are my mate." A third. "No one in this pack will ever hurt you again." Seraphine opened her mouth, closed it. The words were too large to process, too impossible. Not wolfless, mate, protected. They did not fit into the narrow shape her life had taken, did not align with the truth she had been force-fed since she was 13 years old. "How do you know," she asked finally, "about the wolfless part?" "Because I can feel her, your wolf. She's there, Seraphine. Buried deep, but there." "I can't feel anything. I never have." "You will." He said it with the same absolute certainty he had used in the kennels, as though her doubt was irrelevant in the face of what he knew to be true. "Sleep now. Tomorrow we'll find out why she's hidden, and we'll bring her home." He left before she could ask what he meant. The door closed with a soft click, and Seraphine was alone with a window and clean clothes and the creeping, terrifying suspicion that her entire life had been built on a lie. Dr. Elowyn Thornwick arrived at dawn. Seraphine had not slept. She had lain in the unfamiliar bed with its clean sheets and soft pillows. But every time she closed her eyes, she felt the ghost of the Alpha command wrapping around her. Will felt the way her body had moved without her permission, and the violation of it made her skin crawl. So she had watched the sky instead, tracked the stars as they wheeled overhead, and tried to make sense of the impossible things the Lycan King had said. Dr. Elowyn was old. Not elderly, but old in the way of women who had seen enough of the world's cruelty to develop a protective layer of sharp edges and sharper opinions. She was 62, gray-haired and lean, with eyes that missed nothing, and a manner that suggested she had stopped caring about social niceties sometime around her 40th birthday. She had served the Lycan throne for 40 years, had set the bones of kings, stitched closed wounds that should have been fatal, performed surgery on battlefields using whatever tools came to hand. She had seen things that would make most wolves weep, and she had stopped weeping decades ago. "Sit," Elowyn said when she entered the room. Not unkindly, but with the kind of brisk authority that expected obedience. She carried a leather satchel that smelled of herbs and antiseptic, and she set it on the table with the care of someone handling valuable tools. Seraphine sat. Theron stood by the door, arms folded, watching. Cadmus Ironheart was there, too silent as a shadow, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword, more from habit than expectation of violence. Elowen placed her hand on Seraphine's chest directly over her sternum, where the wolfbond was supposed to live. Her palm was warm, calloused. She closed her eyes. What she found made her go very still. The stillness stretched. Seraphine could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the pressure of Elowen's hand like a brand. Theron shifted his weight just slightly, and the movement broke the silence. "What is it?" he asked. His voice was carefully controlled, but Seraphine could hear the edge beneath it. Worry, fear, the kind of emotions a king was not supposed to show. Elowen opened her eyes. Her expression was complicated, part fury, part grief, part something else that looked disturbingly like wonder. "She's not wolfless," Elowen said. The words hung in the air. Seraphine felt something lurch in her chest, a sensation like falling. "She's suppressed." "Explain." Theron's voice had gone flat. "Dangerous." Elowen removed her hand from Seraphine's chest and sat back. She looked tired suddenly. Ancient. "Her wolf is there," Elowen said. "It's been there since childhood. Since birth, probably. But it's been driven so deep inside her that it's essentially dormant. Buried beneath layers of psychological trauma, emotional neglect, and what I can only describe as systematic rejection." She turned to look at Seraphine, and her eyes were bright with anger. When an entire pack tells a child she's empty, the child's wolf eventually believes it. It retreats, it hides. It curls itself so small that no one can detect it, not even the child herself. It's a survival mechanism. The wolf protects itself the only way it can, by disappearing. Seraphine's breath came in shallow gasps. The riverstone was still in her pocket. Someone had retrieved it from the great hall floor and returned it to her, and she gripped it, now felt its smooth edge bite into her palm. "That's not..." Her voice cracked. She swallowed, tried again. "That can't be right. I was tested. They tested me at 13. "Tested by whom?" Elowen asked quietly. "By my father. He brought a pack healer. The healer examined me and said there was nothing there. No wolf, just nothing." "The healer was wrong," Elowen said. "Or lying, or simply not skilled enough to see past the damage." She turned to Theron, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of a professional delivering a diagnosis that would change everything. "Her wolf is rare, Your Majesty. The signature is unlike anything I've encountered in 40 years of practice. It's old, ancient lineage. I would need to run genetic markers to be certain, but if I'm right, and I am rarely wrong, she carries the lunarisma." Theron went very still. "That's not possible. The lunarisma bloodline has been extinct for 200 years. "Apparently not." Elowen gestured to Seraphine. "Look at her eyes." Seraphine blinked, confused. Theron moved closer, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. But she held his gaze and watched something shift in his expression. "Pale violet," he said softly. "I thought it was the light." "It's not the light, it's a genetic marker. The soul light bearers always had eyes that color. Violet silver, sometimes pale gold. But always unusual, always striking." Elowen's voice gentled just slightly. "The lunarisma allows the bearer to reach wolf consciousness, directly bypassing the human mind. It's why the feral wolves responded to her. She wasn't speaking to their human halves. She was speaking to the wolf inside them, the part that's been lost or broken or driven mad by trauma. And her wolf has been suffocating in silence," Theron said, "for over 2 decades. "Yes." Theron said nothing for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was controlled, with the kind of precision that suggested what would happen if he lost. That control would be catastrophic. "Her own father petitioned to have her removed from the pack registry." "Yes," Elowen confirmed. "While her wolf was alive inside him." "Yes." "While she was a child." "Yes." The word fell like a stone. Theron's hands curled into fists, and Seraphine could see the tendons standing out in his forearms, could see the effort it took for him to remain still. "What does this mean?" Seraphine asked. Her voice was very small, but very clear. "If I have a wolf, if she's been there the whole time, does that mean everything they told me was wrong?" Theron crossed the room. He knelt before her as a Lycan King, ruler of 5 territories and commander of thousands, knelt on the floor of a borrowed room and looked up at a girl who had been cleaning cages 12 hours ago. "Everything they told you was wrong," he said. "Your wolf has been with you through every moment of it, every rejection, every cruelty. Every night you slept in the servant wing and believed you deserved to be there. She was there. She was enduring it with you." Seraphine's breath hitched. Something behind her ribs, something she had always interpreted as emptiness, as the hollow space where a wolf should have been shifted. Not a surge, not a dramatic awakening, just a flutter, a whisper, the softest possible acknowledgement. You are not alone. You have never been alone. A tear slipped down her cheek. She did not wipe it away. I can feel her, she breathed. Oh gods, I can feel her. The news spread through Thornmire like wildfire through dry timber. The wolfless girl was not wolfless. The Lycan King claimed she was his mate. Alpha Aldrich had used an alpha command against her in front of the crown, and the king had broken it with his bare presence. And there was talk whispered in kitchens and training yards, passed between servants and warriors alike, of an ancient bloodline, the Lunarisma extinct for 2 centuries, but now somehow walking among them in the form of a girl they had dismissed as broken. The pack fractured along predictable lines. Those who had always been uncomfortable with how the wolfless were treated, a larger number than anyone would have guessed, drifted toward cautious support. They whispered about how Seraphine had always been quiet, always been gentle, had always done what was asked without complaint. And wasn't it strange that they had never questioned whether she deserved better? That they had watched her descend into servitude with nothing more than vague discomfort, the same way you might feel passing a dead animal on the road, unfortunate, but not your problem. But those loyal to Aldrich the warriors, the ranked families, the wolves who had built their identities on the hierarchy that placed them firmly above people like Seraphine closed ranks. Beta Corwin was loudest among them, stalking the compound with his jaw clenched. So tight the tendons in his neck stood out like cables. She's manipulating him, Corwin told anyone who would listen. The king's been on the road for weeks. He's vulnerable. She's latched onto his weakness like the parasite she is. But the wolves in the eastern kennels told a different story. Seraphine had asked quietly, almost apologetically, if she could visit them again. Theron had wanted to refuse, had wanted to keep her away from the cages that had been her punishment, the place where she had been sent to be hurt or killed or both. But Cadmus had counseled otherwise. Let her go, the commander had said. Let the pack see what she can do. So she went, and the entire pack watched. She moved from cage to cage with the same unhurried gentleness she had shown the night before. The same rag and bucket, though. Now the water was warm, and the rags were clean, and Theron's royal guard stood at both ends of the corridor with hands on sword hilts and eyes that tracked every shadow. The feral wolves responded to her the way flowers respond to rain. They turned toward her, pressed against bars, offered rumbles that were not growls but something closer to purring. Finian Greywater, the gray wolf with the swollen eye, licked her palm through the bars. The russet female Marin rolled onto her back and exposed her belly in a show of trust that made the watching guards exchange glances. Pack members gathered at the corridor entrance. They stared disbelieving as wolves who had been caged for months, wolves who had attacked every handler sent to feed them, who had killed 3 people and injured a dozen more, behaved like tamed dogs in the presence of a girl who could not even shift. What is she? Someone whispered. Elowen, who had followed Seraphine down to observe, turned to the crowd. When she spoke, her voice carried. If I'm right, and I am rarely wrong, her wolf carries the Lunarisma, the soul light, in Oshiwide. It's a gift from the founding bloodlines extinct for 200 years. It allows the bearer to reach wolf consciousness, directly bypassing the human mind entirely. It's why the ferals respond to her. She's speaking to the part of them that's been lost. The whispers intensified, spread. By nightfall, everyone in Thornmire knew. By morning, runners would carry the news to neighboring packs. By the end of the week, the Continental Council would hear of it. And Aldrich Ashcroft, sitting in his study with a glass of whiskey that was doing nothing to calm his nerves, felt his grip on the pack slipping like sand through clenched fingers. He called Corwin in that evening. The king has no right to interfere with internal pack affairs, Aldrich said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were wild. The girl is registered under Thornmire jurisdiction. She cannot be claimed without my consent. You're going to deny the Lycan King his mate. Corwin's tone was careful. He was many things: brutal, efficient, loyal to a fault, but he was not stupid. I'm going to remind the crown that even kings are bound by the old accords. A packmate cannot be transferred without the Alpha's seal, and I will not seal a transfer that makes me look like a fool in front of the entire territory. It was pride, pure, toxic, suicidal pride, the kind that had destroyed packs before and would destroy packs again. Aldrich did not care about Seraphine. He had never cared about Seraphine, but he cared very much about being right. And admitting that he had been wrong about her, about the wolfless, about all of it, would mean admitting that the foundation of his authority was rotten. So he chose to fight. And in doing so, he set fire to his own house. There was a 4th person in the room, though neither Aldrich nor Corwin had noticed him arrive. He stood in the shadows near the bookshelf, perfectly still, his presence masked by a skill that came from decades of practice. Counselor Severin Blackwood was 58 years old and had served on the Continental Council for 23 of them. He was tall and thin with silver hair and the kind of face that inspired trusted, open, honest, the face of a beloved uncle or a patient teacher. It was a lie. Everything about Severin Blackwood was a lie. He had been at the Continental Council meeting when Theron Ravenclaw announced his intention to audit Thornmire Pack, had watched the Lycan King's departure with the calm interest of a man who had very good reasons to be invested in what happened in obscure mountain territories. And when word reached him, carried by runners, he paid well for their speed and discretion, that a girl with pale violet eyes and unusual control over feral wolves had been discovered in Thornmire's kennels. Severin had boarded the first transport north, because Severin Blackwood knew exactly what the Lunarisma was, and he knew exactly how dangerous it could be. To him, to the careful architecture of power he had been building for 20 years. He stepped from the shadows now, and both Aldrich and Corwin jumped. "Counselor Blackwood," Aldrich said, pressing a hand to his chest. "I didn't hear you arrive." "I arrived quietly," Severin said. His voice was mild, pleasant. "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion. I came as soon as I heard." "Heard what?" "About the girl, about what she is." Severin moved to the desk, poured himself a measure of whiskey without asking permission. "The Lunarisma, it's troubling." "Busu troubling?" Corwin frowned. "She's just a servant, wolfless, or was." "She was never wolfless," Severin said patiently. "Her wolf was suppressed. Do you understand the difference?" Both men shook their heads. Suppression is not a natural occurrence. It requires sustained psychological trauma, the kind of trauma that can only be inflicted deliberately over years with the specific intention of breaking a child's connection to their wolf. Severin sipped his whiskey. "Someone did this to her. Someone wanted the Lunarisma bloodline to stay buried." "Who?" Aldrich asked. Severin smiled. It was a kind smile, a grandfather's smile. "Me," he said. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Aldrich stared at Severin Blackwood whiskey glass frozen halfway to his lips. Corwin's hand drifted toward the knife at his belt, then stopped uncertain. "You did not draw weapons on Continental Council members. Not unless you were prepared for the consequences to be swift and permanent. You," Aldrich's voice came out hoarse. "You suppressed her wolf. Not directly." Severin settled into a chair as though he had been invited, crossing one leg over the other, with the ease of a man completely comfortable in his own skin. "I provided the methodology. Your father was the one who implemented it. 35 years ago, when another girl with violet eyes appeared in Thornmire Pack. Morgana, I believe her name was. She married into the Ashcroft line." Aldrich's face went pale. "Thomas's wife. Seraphine's mother." "The very same." Severin swirled his whiskey, watching the amber liquid catch the lamplight. "Your father was a practical man, Aldrich. When I explained to him what the Lunarisma could do, how it could undermine pack hierarchies, how it gave Omega's power that had nothing to do with physical strength or political position, he understood immediately that it needed to be controlled. Morgana was exiled," Corwin said slowly, 20 years ago, for," he stopped, realization dawning, "for trying to protect her daughter, for trying to undo what had been done to her own wolf. Yes." Severin's voice remained pleasant, conversational. "When she realized that Seraphine was showing the same signs, the pale eyes, the unusual connection to other wolves, she panicked, tried to intervene. Your father had no choice but to remove her from the territory." "She's alive," Aldrich stood abruptly. "You told me she died in exile. You said—" "I said what you needed to hear to maintain order." Severin's expression did not change. "The truth is far less convenient. Morgana is alive. And if the Lycan King discovers that fact, if he learns that Thornmire has been systematically suppressing Lunarisma carriers for 2 generations, the consequences will be severe." The room fell silent. Aldrich sank back into his chair, looking 10 years older than he had 5 minutes ago. "How many?" he asked finally. "How many others?" "Across all 5 territories, 18 over the course of 20 years. Severin ticked them off on his fingers with the detached precision of an accountant reviewing ledgers. 9 took their own lives. 6 went feral and had to be put down. 3 disappeared, Morgana among them. Seraphine is the only one still functioning within Pack Society. She's also the only one whose wolf survived suppression intact." "Why, boy," Corwin's voice was rough. "Why do this? What does it gain you?" Severin looked at him with something approaching pity. "Control Beta. The Lunarisma disrupts the natural order. It gives power to those who should not have it. Omegas who can command ferals, who can reach wolf minds directly, who answer to no alpha because their authority comes from something older than pack hierarchy. Do you see the problem?" "No," Corwin said flatly. "I see you playing God with people's lives." I see the stability of our society. Severin stood brushing invisible dust from his sleeves. But that stability is now threatened. The Lycan King knows what she is. He's claimed her as his mate, and unless we act quickly, everything I've built over the past 20 years will unravel. What are you proposing? Aldrich's voice was barely a whisper. Severin smiled. It was the smile of a man who had already won, who was merely explaining the rules of a game that had been over before it started. Frame her as a fraud. Use dark magic to permanently sever what's left of her connection to her wolf. Discredit the Lycan King's judgment before the Continental Council. He paused. And if that fails, ensure she has an accident. Feral wolves are unpredictable. People die in the kennels all the time. The words were said so casually, so matter-of-factly, that it took Aldrich a moment to register what he was hearing. When he did, something inside him recoiled. He was many things, proud, stubborn, willing to bend rules when it suited him, but he was not a murderer, not of young women, not of his own blood. No, he said, I won't be part of killing her. Severin's smile never wavered. Then you'll be part of your own downfall, because the moment Theron Ravenclaw finishes his investigation, he'll find the financial discrepancies. The $47,000 you've been skimming from tributes to pay for my consulting services. The records of every suppression your father conducted under my guidance. And when he presents that evidence to the Continental Council, you'll spend the rest of your life in exile, if you're lucky. He moved toward the door, then paused. You have 72 hours to decide which side of history you want to be on, Alpha Ashcroft. Choose wisely. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Aldrich and Corwin sat in silence, the weight of Severin's words pressing down on them like a physical thing. Finally, Corwin spoke. We could tell the king, expose Severin. With what proof? Aldrich laughed bitterly. A counselor's word against ours. He's spent 20 years covering his tracks. He'll have destroyed any evidence that ties him to the suppressions. All that will remain is our complicity. So we do nothing. We survive. Aldrich poured himself another drink with shaking hands, and we pray that the Lycan King's investigation is less thorough than I fear it will be. But prayer was not enough. It had never been enough. The assassination attempt came on the fourth night. Seraphine had been given dinner in her quarters, roasted venison, fresh bread, vegetables that still tasted of the garden where they'd been grown. It was more food than she usually saw in a week, and she ate slowly, savoring each bite, still half convinced. This was a dream she would wake from, to find herself back in the servant quarters, with a bowl of thin gruel and a list of impossible tasks. The wine had been an afterthought. A servant had brought it with the meal, explaining that it was from the Alpha's personal reserve, a gift to welcome the Lycan King's mate to Thornmire. Seraphine had been suspicious. Aldrich did not strike her as the gift-giving type, but the servant's face had been open innocent, and she had assumed Theron had arranged it through official channels. She raised the glass to her lips, and Theron burst through the door. Don't drink that! His roar shook the walls. Seraphine's hand jerked wine sloshing over the rim. Theron crossed the room in 2 strides and smashed the glass from her grip. It shattered against the floor, red wine spreading across the stone like blood. Where it touched the cracks in the flagstones, it hissed, smoking. Wolfsbane, Theron's voice was hoarse. Concentrated extract. Lethal to wolves. Fatal to humans. Seraphine stared at the spreading stain, at the way the wine ate into the stone with the hungry efficiency of acid. Her chest heaved with ragged breaths. She could not finish the sentence. I know. Theron pulled her into his arms, and she went too shocked to do anything else. His chest was solid beneath her cheek, his heartbeat thundering so hard she could feel it through his shirt. The mate bond warned me. I felt your intention to drink, and something in me screamed danger. Cadmus appeared in the doorway, sword drawn, 4 royal guards at his back. He took one look at the wine stain and barked orders. Lock down this wing. No one in or out without my authorization. Find the servant who delivered that wine, and get Dr. Ello in here now. The guards scattered. Cadmus knelt beside the wine stain, producing a small vial from his belt and collecting a sample with the careful precision of someone who had done this before. The servant was found 20 minutes later, hiding in the stables. She broke under questioning, almost immediately, tears streaming down her face as she confessed that Beta Corwin had given her the wine and told her it was a gift. She had not known. She swore she had not known. Theron believed her. Corwin, when dragged before them in chains, was less convincing. Severin gave it to me, the Beta said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were wild. He said it was sleeping draught. Said the girl needed rest after the stress of the past few days. I didn't know it was poison. You're lying. Theron's words were soft, deadly. I can smell the fear on you. You knew exactly what you were carrying. Corwin's facade cracked. He said if I didn't do it, he'd expose everything. The embezzlement, The suppressions. He said Aldrich and I would both hang for it. So you chose to murder an innocent woman instead. She's not innocent. The words burst out of Corwin like a confession he could no longer contain. She's a threat to pack stability, to everything we've built. The Lunarisma gives Omegas power they shouldn't have. It undermines the natural order. Severin was right to... He stopped, realized what he had said, but it was too late. Severin was right to what? Theron's voice was a blade. To suppress 18 wolves over 20 years, to drive 9 of them to suicide, to murder anyone who threatened his vision of pack hierarchy. Corwin said nothing. His silence was answer enough. Take him to the holding cells, Theron said to Cadmus. I want a full confession. Names, dates, every detail he knows about Severin's operation. And then I want evidence. Financial records, correspondence, anything that ties Severin to the suppressions. And Severin himself, Cadmus asked. He'll have run by now. The moment Corwin was arrested, he would have known his cover was blown. Theron's jaw clenched. Send runners to every border crossing. I want him found. And when you find him, bring him to me alive. I want him to stand trial for what he's done. Cadmus saluted and left, taking Corwin with him. The beta went quietly, shoulders slumped, the fight drained out of him. Seraphine stood in the center of the room, staring at the wine stain that could have been her blood. Theron returned to her side, but this time he did not reach for her. Just stood close enough that she could feel his presence solid and steady. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I should have anticipated this. Should have had guards on your food, should have... You saved my life. Her voice was small but clear. The mate bond warned you. If you hadn't felt it, she did not finish. I will always feel it. Theron's hand came up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she did not, he cupped her face thumb, brushing away a tear he had not realized she'd shed. That's what the mate bond means, Seraphine. Your pain is my pain. Your danger is my danger. And I will burn this entire territory to ash before I let anyone hurt you again. The words should have frightened her. They were fierce, violent, spoken with an intensity that bordered on madness. But instead, they made her feel safe. For the first time in her life, someone was willing to fight for her, to stand between her and harm, to value her life as much as their own. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me. His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone, and his wolf still hovered close to surface. Just stay alive. That's all I ask. She nodded, and for the first time since he had appeared in her life like a storm made flesh, Seraphine allowed herself to lean into his touch, to accept comfort, to believe just for a moment that she might actually be worth protecting. The moment shattered when the window exploded inward. Glass sprayed across the room. Theron moved on instinct, spinning to put his body between Seraphine and the threat, one arm sweeping her behind him. An arrow embedded itself in the wall where her head had been seconds before the iron point sunk deep into stone. There was a note wrapped around the shaft. Theron tore it free, read it in a single glance, and his growl shook dust from the rafters. What does it say? Seraphine asked. Her voice was remarkably steady, given that she had nearly died twice in the span of an hour. Theron handed her the note without speaking. The words were written in elegant script, the handwriting of someone educated and cultured. Leave Thornmire within 24 hours, or the next arrow finds her heart. This is your only warning. S.B. Severin. Seraphine's hands clenched on the paper. He's still here. Not for long, Theron's voice was glacial. Cadmus. The commander appeared in the doorway, sword-drawn eyes scanning for threats. Lock down the compound, Theron ordered. No one leaves, no one. Search every building, every room. Find Counselor Severin Blackwood and bring him to me. Alive if possible. Dead if necessary. And the girl stays with me. I don't care about propriety. I don't care about appearances. Until Severin is in chains, she does not leave my sight. Cadmus nodded and vanished. Theron turned back to Seraphine, and she saw something in his face that took her breath away. Not anger, though there was plenty of that. Not fear, though she suspected he felt it too. It was determination, absolute and unshakable. The look of a man who had decided that something mattered more than his own life and who would move mountains to protect it. Pack a bag, he said quietly. Anything you want to keep. We're leaving Thornmire tonight. Leaving, but you said... I said I wanted Severin found. I didn't say we would stay here while the search happened. Theron moved to the window, checking sight lines with the practiced efficiency of a soldier. This compound is compromised. Severin has supporters here, people Aldrich has known for years, people who owe their positions to the old hierarchy and will do anything to preserve it. We're not safe. Where will we go? Shadow Peak Citadel, the royal seat in Colorado. He glanced back at her. It's 3 days' travel on horseback. The road goes through rough country, the Bitterroot passes, then down through Wyoming into the Rockies. Can you ride? Seraphine thought of the 8 years she had spent in the servant quarters, the skills she had taught herself in stolen moments when no one was watching. Yes, I can ride. Good. Theron crossed to the door, opened it a crack, checked the hallway. We leave in 1 hour. Pack light, bring the Riverstone. Why the Riverstone? He turned to look at her and something in his expression gentled. Because it's kept you alive this long, and because I have a feeling we're going to need all the protection we can get. An hour later, under cover of darkness, in the chaos of Cadmus's lockdown, Theron and Seraphine slipped out of Thornmire compound on horseback. 4 royal guards went with them, hand-picked warriors Theron trusted with his life. They rode hard through the night, putting as much distance between themselves and Thornmire as the horses could manage. The Bitterroot Mountains loomed around them, jagged peaks silhouetted against the sky thick with stars. Seraphine had never been this far from Thornmire, had never traveled beyond the territory boundaries. The world felt impossibly vast, impossibly dark, and if not for Theron riding beside her, steady, silent, a presence that anchored her to the moment she thought she might have panicked. They stopped at dawn in a narrow canyon sheltered by pine trees. The guards posted watch while Theron built a small fire, coaxing flames from damp wood with the patient efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times. Seraphine sat on a fallen log and watched him work. Her body ached from hours in the saddle. Her hands were blistered from gripping the reins. But she was alive, and she was free of Thornmire, and that was enough. You should rest, Theron said without looking up from the fire. We'll ride again at midday. I'm not tired. It was a lie. She was exhausted. But the thought of closing her eyes, of letting her guard down even for a moment, made her skin crawl. Theron glanced at her. Something in her face must have given her away because he abandoned the fire and crossed to where she sat. May I? He asked, gesturing to the space beside her on the log. She nodded. He sat, close enough that she could feel his warmth but not touching, giving her space, always giving her space to choose. I was thinking, Theron said after a moment, about what you said in the kennels, that first night. I said a lot of things. You asked the gray wolf when someone had last touched him gently. Theron's voice was quiet. I've been wondering the same thing about you. Seraphine's throat tightened. I don't remember. My mother, maybe, before everything changed. That's 22 years of no one touching you with kindness. He turned to look at her, and his eyes brown again. The amber receded, held something she could not name. I want to change that, if you'll let me. You already have, she said. You broke the Alpha command. You saved me from the poison. You're taking me somewhere safe. That's protection. Theron reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused from years of sword work. I'm talking about this, about being allowed to hold your hand, about you trusting me enough to lean on me when you're tired, about building something that isn't just me standing between you and danger. Seraphine looked down at their joined hands. It was such a small thing, such an ordinary gesture, but no one had held her hand since she was a child. No one had touched her with anything other than indifference or cruelty. What are you asking? She whispered. Permission. Theron's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. To court you, properly, the way you deserve, with time and respect and the understanding that you have every right to say no. You're the Lycan king, I'm a servant. I don't have the right to say no to you. You do, he said it fiercely. You have every right, always. I don't want obedience, Seraphine. I don't want submission because you're afraid or because you think you own me. I want partnership. I want equals. And that means you get to choose. She looked at him, really looked. At the scar on his face, the lines around his eyes, the way he held himself with perfect stillness, as though her answer was the most important thing in the world, and he would wait as long as it took for her to give it. I want that too, she said finally. Equals, partners, not just the mate bond, Theron finished, not just biology deciding for us. Yes, he smiled. It was a small smile, tentative, as though he were not quite sure he had permission for it. Then we'll build it. Together. One day at a time. I don't know how to do this, Seraphine admitted. No one has ever courted me. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Neither do I. Theron's smile widened slightly. I've been too busy running a kingdom to have time for romance. We'll figure it out together. Make mistakes, forgive each other. Try again. That sounds terrifying. It is. He squeezed her hand gently, but less terrifying than the alternative, which is spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I'd been brave enough to ask. Seraphine felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Not her wolf, though she could feel that presence too hovering just out of reach. This was different. This was human. This was her heart cautiously, carefully beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to want things, to have things, to be more than what Thormir had told her she was. Okay, she said, court me. Teach me how this works. First lesson, Theron said, is that you're allowed to ask for what you need. So tell me, right now, what do you need? Seraphine considered. What did she need? Sleep, certainly. Food, safety. But beneath all of that, I need to stop being afraid, she said finally. I need to believe that this is real, that you're real, that I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and find out this was all a dream and I'm still in the servant quarters cleaning floors. Theron lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. It was chaste, gentle, the kind of gesture that might have been meaningless from someone else. But from him, from the Lycan King who knelt before her and asked permission and treated her choices like they mattered, it felt like a promise. I'm real, he said against her skin. This is real. And tomorrow you'll wake up in Shadow Peak Citadel, and I'll still be here and we'll still be figuring this out together. I promise you that. She believed him. They rode for 3 days through country that grew progressively rougher as they descended from the Bitterroot Peaks into Wyoming's high plains. Theron set a punishing pace, stopping only when the horses needed rest. He spoke little, conserving energy, but Seraphine found she did not mind the silence. It was comfortable, companionable, the silence of two people who did not need words to understand each other. On the second night, camped in a valley where a cold stream cut through granite, Seraphine discovered the extent of her neglected education. One of the guards, a young man named Garrett, had caught a rabbit, and Seraphine found herself watching as he prepared it for cooking. The motions were practiced, efficient, and it occurred to her with sudden clarity that she had no idea how to survive outside of Thornmeyer's servant quarters. She could clean. She could cook with ingredients someone else provided. She could mend clothes and scrub floors and perform 1,000 small tasks of servitude. But she could not hunt, could not track, could not read the land the way these warriors did, noting game trails and water sources and the subtle signs that told them where it was safe to camp. Something wrong, Theron asked, appearing beside her with 2 bowls of stew. I'm useless, Seraphine said flatly. Out here, I'm completely useless. Theron handed her a bowl and sat down beside her on the fallen log she had claimed. You're not useless. I can't hunt, can't fight, can't do any of the things that would make me valuable on a journey like this. You calmed 7 feral wolves with nothing but your presence and your voice, Theron pointed out. You survived 8 years of systematic abuse without becoming cruel yourself. You learned to read weather patterns from a broken radio and terrain from memory. Don't mistake specialized skills for uselessness. Seraphine, you're just learning a different set of skills now. She looked at him. How did you know about the weather patterns and the terrain? Eloan mentioned it, said you'd been teaching yourself meteorology during your time in the servant quarters, that you could predict storms. He took a bite of stew, chewed thoughtfully. Can you poem? Seraphine nodded. There's a storm coming, day after tomorrow. Big one. We should reach Shadow Peak before it hits, but it's going to be close. Theron looked up at the sky. It was clear stars brilliant against velvet black. I don't see anything. You won't, not yet. But the pressure's dropping, the wind shifted direction twice in the last hour, and the birds went quiet this afternoon. They were already seeking shelter. She gestured to the stream. The water level's rising. There's rain in the mountains we can't see yet, but it's coming. 36 hours, maybe less. One of the guards, an older woman named Kira, had been listening. She exchanged a glance with Theron. If she's right, we need to adjust our route. The valley pass floods in heavy rain. I'm right, Seraphine said with more confidence than she felt. Theron studied her for a long moment, then nodded. We'll take the ridge route. It's longer but safer in bad weather. He had listened to her, had taken her word over his own observations, had changed their plans based on skills she had taught herself in secret during the loneliest years of her life. It was a small thing, but it mattered. That night, lying in her bedroll near the fire, Seraphine felt her wolf stir. Not dramatically, just a quiet presence, a warmth that spread through her chest like sunlight through morning mist. We are not useless, the wolf seemed to say. We have always been strong. They just could not see it. Seraphine closed her eyes and for the first time in her life, silently thanked the wolf who had endured everything alongside her. They reached Shadow Peak Citadel on the morning of the 4th day, 2 hours before the storm. Seraphine had predicted broke over the Rockies with biblical fury. The citadel was carved into the side of a mountain gray stone and dark timber rising in defiant tiers against the sky. It looked ancient, impermanent, the kind of structure that had stood for centuries and would stand for centuries more. Seraphine stared up at it as they rode through the gates and felt something in her chest loosen. This was Theron's home, and if he kept his promises, if they truly were building something together, it might become hers too. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like hope. Cadmus was waiting in the courtyard along with a contingent of guards and what looked like half the Citadel's staff. He bowed to Theron, then turned to Seraphine and executed the same formal bow. "My lady," he said, "welcome to Shadow Peak." "My lady," not servant, not wolfless. "My lady." Seraphine's throat tightened. She managed a nod, not trusting her voice. "Any word from Thornmeyer?" Theron asked as he dismounted. "Severin Blackwood escaped the lockdown," Cadmus reported. "But we have his trail. He's heading north, likely toward the Canadian border. I've sent trackers. We'll find him." "And the evidence?" "Substantial." Cadmus handed Theron a thick folder. Financial records showing $47,000 in embezzled funds paid to Severin over 3 years. Medical records from Thornmeyer's archives documenting 18 suppression cases. And Corwin's full confession, which includes names, dates, and methods used. Theron flipped through the folder, his expression darkening with each page. "This is enough to convene a Continental Council tribunal." "I thought it might be. I've already sent word. The council will convene here in 2 weeks." "Here," Theron looked up. "Not at the council seat. The evidence is here. The witnesses are here, and frankly, Your Majesty, I don't trust anyone at the council seat not to warn Severin." Cadmus's voice was grim. "We have one chance to do this right. We do it on our terms in our territory, where we control every variable." Theron nodded slowly. "Agreed. Start preparations. I want a public tribunal, full transparency. Every pack in the 5 territories sends representatives. And I want Morgana Ashcroft found and brought here." "Morgana," Seraphine's voice cracked. "My mother. She's alive." Theron turned to her, and his expression was gentle. "According to XL records, yes. Cadmus, that's your priority. Find her. Bring her home." "At once, Your Majesty." As Cadmus strode away barking orders to his lieutenants, Theron took Seraphine's hand. "Come inside," he said quietly. "You need rest, and we need to talk about what happens next." What happened next was Dr. Elowen. The healer had arrived at Shadow Peak the day before, summoned by Cadmus's message about the tribunal. She took one look at Seraphine, exhausted, filthy, from days of travel, barely holding herself together, and clucked her tongue like a disapproving hen. "Bath first, then food, then we talk about your wolf." "My wolf?" Seraphine followed Elowen through the Citadel's labyrinthine corridors, too tired to argue. "You've been feeling her more, haven't you? The connection getting stronger." "Yes, especially at night. It's like she's trying to reach me, but there's still this wall between us." "The wall is fear," Elowen said bluntly. 22 years of fear built up layer by layer every time someone told you that you were broken. Your wolf is ready to emerge, Seraphine. The question is whether you're ready to let her." They reached a bathing room where steam rose from a large copper tub. Servants had laid out clean clothes soap that smelled of lavender, towels so thick and soft they looked like clouds. "I'll be back in an hour," Elowen said. "Soak, relax, and think about what you're willing to risk for your wolf." "What do you mean, risk?" "The final awakening won't be gentle. You've spent your entire life suppressing her, teaching yourself not to feel her. Reversing that means confronting every moment of pain, every rejection, every cruelty you've endured. It means feeling it all again, but this time with her beside you instead of buried inside you." Elowen's eyes were kind, but unyielding. "It's going to hurt, child. The question is whether you trust her enough, trust yourself enough to survive it." She left before Seraphine could answer. The bath helped. Seraphine sank into water hot enough to make her skin pink, washing away days of trail dust and fear and exhaustion. But Elowen's words echoed in her head. "What are you willing to risk for your wolf?" Everything, Seraphine realized. She was willing to risk everything. Because the alternative was going back to who she had been in Thornmeyer. And that girl, silent, invisible, convinced of her own worthlessness, was dead. Had died the moment Theron Ravenclaw looked at her and said, "You are not wolfless." She could not go back. Would not go back. Which meant she had to go forward, even if it hurt. Seraphine closed her eyes and reached for her wolf, not with desperation this time, but with intention, with invitation. "I'm ready," she said silently. "I'm ready to meet you. I'm ready to remember. Show me." The wolf responded, and the world dissolved into memory. She was 13, standing in the ceremonial circle under the autumn moon, watching her peers shift one by one, feeling nothing, feeling empty. Her father's face when he looked at her, not angry, not sad, just blank, erased, as though she had already ceased to exist. She was 14, listening to her father petition for her removal from the registry, standing in the great hall surrounded by witnesses, and not one of them spoke up for her. Not one. She was 15, 16, 17, cleaning floors, washing dishes, hauling water. Invisible. Less than nothing. Every rejection. every cruelty, every moment she had learned to make herself smaller, quieter, less, in the desperate hope that if she just took up less space, maybe they would let her stay. It poured through her in a torrent, and Seraphine wept, sobbed, screamed into the empty bathing room because there was no one to hear her and no one to tell her to be quiet. And through it all, her wolf was there, not separate, not distant, right there beside her, enduring it all again, because that was what it meant to be one being. The wolf had felt every moment of her pain, had retreated not out of weakness but out of love, because staying visible would have broken Seraphine completely, and the wolf had loved her too much to let that happen. "I'm sorry," Seraphine sobbed. "I'm so sorry I didn't know. I'm sorry I believed them. I'm sorry I let you suffer alone." The wolf's response was wordless but clear. "You were never alone. I was always here. I will always be here. We survived together." The wall between them crumbled, and Seraphine felt her wolf rise to the surface, not in a shift, not yet, but in full consciousness. A presence beside her own thoughts. A partner. An equal. "Hello," Seraphine whispered. "Hello," her wolf answered. And for the first time in 22 years, Seraphine Ashcroft was whole. She found Theron in his study, bent over maps and correspondence, his face tight with concentration. He looked up when she entered, and whatever he saw in her expression made him rise immediately. "What happened?" "I met her." Seraphine's voice was steady despite the tears still wet on her cheeks. "My wolf, I finally met her." Theron crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. She went willingly, pressing her face against his chest and breathing in cedar and wood smoke in safety. "Tell me," he said quietly. So she did. Told him about the memories, the pain, the wall crumbling. Told him about her wolf's forgiveness, about the consciousness now living alongside her own. "She's been protecting me this whole time," Seraphine whispered. "Hiding because she knew if she didn't, they would break both of us. She loved me enough to disappear. And now she's here. We're here. Together." Seraphine pulled back enough to look up at him. "Elowen says the full shift will come soon. Days, maybe. Once the connection is this strong, my body will follow. And when it does," Theron said, cupping her face in his hands, "I'll be right beside you. Every step of the way." She believed him. The Continental Council Tribunal convened at Shadow Peak Citadel on a cold morning 2 weeks later. The Great Hall had been transformed. Tiered seating lined the walls, filled with representatives from every pack in the 5 territories, alphas and their advisors, Continental Council members, witnesses summoned from Thornmire and beyond. At the front of the room, a raised platform held 3 chairs for the tribunal: judges Elder Augustus, from the Council, Chief Justice Mara, from the judiciary, and Theron himself as the aggrieved sovereign. Seraphine sat in the first row, flanked by Elowen and Cadmus. She wore a simple dress the color of twilight, and her pale violet eyes were steady as she watched the proceedings begin. Across the aisle, shackled and guarded, sat 3 defendants: Alpha Aldrich Ashcroft, Beta Corwin Stoneheart, and brought in under heavy escort just that morning, Counselor Severin Blackwood. Severin looked smaller than Seraphine remembered, older. His silver hair was disheveled, his usually pristine clothes rumpled from days of fleeing through the wilderness. But his eyes were still sharp, still calculating, as though he were already planning his defense. Elder Augustus rose to open the proceedings. He was 72, white-haired, and lean, with the kind of presence that came from decades of adjudicating pact disputes. "This tribunal is convened under Article 12 of the Continental Accords," he said, his voice carrying easily through the packed hall. "The charges are as follows: systematic suppression of Lunarisma, bloodline Carashirs, conspiracy to commit murder, embezzlement of crown tributes, and abuse of Continental Council authority. The defendants are Alpha Aldrich Ashcroft of Thornmire, Pack Beta Corwin Stoneheart, and Counselor Severin Blackwood." He paused, letting the weight of the charges settle. "The evidence will be presented by the Crown. The defendants will have opportunity to respond. Judgment will be rendered by this tribunal. Let it be known that these proceedings are public and binding, and that all testimony given here is under oath and penalty of perjury." Augustus sat. Theron rose. "Your Honors," Theron began, "I will present 3 categories of evidence: financial, medical, and testimonial. Together, they will show a conspiracy spanning 20 years orchestrated by Counselor Blackwood and enabled by Alpha Ashcroft, resulting in the systematic suppression of 18 Lunarisma bloodline carriers across the 5 territories." He nodded to Cadmus, who stepped forward with the first set of documents. "Financial evidence. Alpha Ashcroft embezzled $47,000 from Crown tributes over 3 years. These funds were transferred to accounts controlled by Severin Blackwood under the guise of consulting fees. In exchange, Blackwood provided methodology for suppressing Lunarisma carriers, and ensured that exile paperwork was approved by the Continental Council without scrutiny. Cadmus distributed copies to the tribunal judges and to representatives in the audience. Seraphine watched as alphas leaned over the documents, their expressions darkening. The medical evidence, Theron continued, comes from Thornmeyer Pack's own archives. 18 cases over 20 years. Each individual showed genetic markers consistent with lunarisma bloodline heritage. Each was classified as wolfless and subjected to psychological trauma designed to suppress their wolf consciousness. 9 committed suicide. 6 went feral and were euthanized. 3 disappeared into exile. Seraphine Ashcroft is the only survivor still functioning within Pack Society. Elowen stood and walked to the platform carrying a stack of medical files. She placed them before the judges with the gravity of someone presenting evidence of a massacre. "These are not hypothetical," Elowen said. "These are people, children, most of them when the suppression began. I have reviewed every case personally. The pattern is unmistakable, deliberate, systematic." She returned to her seat. The hall was silent except for the rustle of paper as the judges reviewed the files. Then came the testimony. Theron called the first witness, Finian Greywater. The young man who emerged from the side door bore little resemblance to the feral gray wolf Seraphine had met in the kennels. He was clean-dressed in simple but well-made clothes, and his eyes, both eyes the swelling finally healed, were clear and focused. He walked to the witness stand and placed his hand on the oath stone. "State your name and affiliation," Augustus said. "Finian Greywater, Border Wolf. No Pack affiliation." "Tell us what happened to you." Finian's voice was quiet but steady. "My sister was killed in a rogue attack 2 years ago. I went feral from grief, couldn't control the shift, couldn't think, couldn't remember who I was. Thornmeyer Pack captured me and locked me in the eastern kennels. I was there for 8 months. What were conditions like in the kennels? We were left to starve, to go mad. Handlers brought food twice a week, threw it through the bars like we were animals. No medical care, no attempt at rehabilitation. 3 wolves died while I was there. No one cared. When did things change?" Finian looked directly at Seraphine. "When she came. The girl. She touched me like I was a person. Spoke to me like my wolf could still understand language. And something inside me remembered. Remembered being human, being loved, having a name." His voice cracked. "She saved my life. Saved all of us. And Thornmeyer sent her down there to be punished. To die. Thank you, Mr. Greywater. You may step down." Theron called the next witness. Marin Swiftwater. The russet wolf, now a slender woman in her 30s, took the stand. Her testimony echoed Finian's. 8 months in the kennels. Brutality, neglect, and then Seraphine bringing warmth and humanity back to wolves everyone else had written off as lost. By the time Marin finished, there were tears in the audience. Then Theron called the witness everyone had been waiting for. Morgana Ashcroft. The woman who entered the hall was 52, but looked older, weathered by years of exile. Her hair was dark with silver streaks, her face aligned with hardship. But her eyes, pale violet, identical to Seraphine's, were fierce and bright. Seraphine half rose from her seat, a sound escaping her that was part shriek, part gasp. Morgana's gaze found her daughter across the crowded room, and her expression shattered into something raw and broken and full of love. "Mother," Seraphine breathed. Theron paused the proceedings. The tribunal grants a brief recess for the witness to greet her daughter. Morgana crossed the hall in a rush. Seraphine met her halfway. They collided in an embrace that was 20 years overdue, both of them crying, both of them holding on as though they could make up for all the lost time by sheer force of will. "I looked for you," Morgana whispered into Seraphine's hair. "Every day for 20 years I looked for you. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you." "You did protect me." Seraphine pulled back enough to show her mother the river stone which she still carried in her pocket. "The ward you placed on this stone kept me alive. It blocked Severin's dark magic. You saved me, Mother. Even when you couldn't be there, you saved me." They held each other for another moment, then Morgana wiped her eyes and turned to face the tribunal. "I'm ready to testify." She took the oath and sat in the witness chair with the posture of a woman who had survived hell and come back stronger. "State your name," Augustus said gently. "Morgana Ashcroft, formerly of Thornmeyer Pack, currently unaffiliated. Tell us what happened 35 years ago." Morgana's voice was steady despite the tears still wet on her cheeks. "I was 17. I had just married Thomas Ashcroft. I had pale violet eyes and an unusual connection to wolves. I could sense their emotions calm them when they were distressed. Alpha Aldrich's father noticed. He brought in a consultant, a man named Severin Blackwood." She looked directly at Severin, and her gaze was a blade. "Severin told the Alpha that I carried a dangerous bloodline, that I needed to be controlled. He taught them how to do it, how to break a child's connection to their wolf through systematic rejection and psychological torture. What did they do to you? They told me I was worthless, that I had no wolf, that I was a burden to the pack. They moved me to the servant quarters, stripped my family of rank. Every day, every interaction was designed to make me believe I was empty. And eventually my wolf believed it too. She retreated so deep inside me that I couldn't feel her anymore. When did you realize what had been done? Years later, after I had Seraphine, when I saw the same pale violet eyes, the same connection to wolves I knew. I knew she carried the bloodline, and I knew they would do to her what they had done to me. Morgana's hands clenched on the arms of the chair. I tried to stop it. I confronted Aldrich. I begged him not to suppress her wolf. But by then, Severin had him completely under control. Aldrich was embezzling to pay for Severin's consulting fees, and Severin threatened to expose him if he didn't comply. What happened then? Aldrich exiled me, told the pack I had died. I spent 20 years in rogue settlements near the Canadian border, searching for my daughter, praying she was still alive. Do you know why Severin wanted the Lunarisma bloodline suppressed? Control, Morgana's voice was bitter. The Lunarisma gives Omega's power that doesn't come from physical strength or alpha dominance. It comes from connection, from empathy, from reaching the wolf consciousness directly. In Severin's world, that kind of power in the hands of Omegas threatens the entire hierarchy. So he's been systematically eliminating anyone who carries the bloodline for 20 years. Thank you, Mrs. Ashcroft. You may step down. Morgana returned to Seraphine's side. They clasped hands and did not let go. Finally, Theron called the last witness, Seraphine Ashcroft. The hall went silent. Every eye turned to her. Seraphine stood. Her legs shook, but she walked to the witness stand with her head high. She placed her hand on the oath stone and felt her wolf rise to meet the moment. We can do this, her wolf said. Together. Together, Seraphine agreed. State your name. Seraphine Ashcroft, 22 years old, formerly of Thornmeyer Pack. Tell us your story, Miss Ashcroft. And she did. She told them about the awakening ceremony at 13, standing in the circle while 12 peers shifted, and she felt nothing. About her father's petition to have her struck from the registry. About 8 years in the servant quarters cleaning and cooking and making herself invisible. She told them about the Eastern Kennels, about being sent down there to about touching Finian's muzzle and feeling for the first time in her life that maybe she wasn't broken. She told them about Theron breaking the Alpha Command, about Elowin's examination, about learning that her wolf had been there all along hiding because the pack had taught her that visibility meant death. And she told them about meeting her wolf, about the wall crumbling, about discovering that every moment of pain she had endured, her wolf had endured beside her. They told me I was worthless, Seraphine said, and her voice rang through the hall. They told me I was empty. They told me I had no place in a pack, and I believed them. For 22 years, I believed them. She looked at Severin, at Aldrich, at Corwin. But they were wrong. My wolf was always there. The Lunarisma was always there. I was never empty. I was never broken. They just couldn't see it because they had decided that people like me, Omega's servants, the lowest ranked, weren't worth looking at. Seraphine turned to face the audience. Hundreds of alphas and pack representatives watching her, with expressions that ranged from shame to anger to something that might have been recognition. This can't happen again, she said. No more children should grow up believing they're worthless. No more wolves should be suppressed because their power doesn't fit into someone else's hierarchy. This ends here, today. The hall erupted in applause. Not from everyone, there were still those who clung to the old ways, who saw the Lunarisma as a threat. But enough. Enough that Seraphine could see the tide had turned. She returned to her seat. Theron caught her eye across the room and nodded once. Pride, respect, partnership. The tribunal deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, Elder Augustus's expression was grim. We have reviewed the evidence. We have heard the testimony. The tribunal renders the following judgments. He turned to Aldrich first. Alpha Aldrich Ashcroft, you are found guilty of embezzlement, conspiracy, and abuse of authority. You are stripped of your alpha title and all pack privileges. You are sentenced to permanent exile from the 5 territories. Your lands and titles are forfeit to the crown. Aldrich's face went white. He opened his mouth to protest, but Augustus's glare silenced him. Beta Corwin Stoneheart, you are found guilty of attempted murder and conspiracy. You are sentenced to 20 years imprisonment to be served in the Crown's maximum security facility. Upon release, you are permanently banished from the 5 territories. Corwin's head dropped. He said nothing. Counselor Severin Blackwood. The hall went utterly silent. You are found guilty of 18 counts of forced suppression, conspiracy to commit murder, abuse of Continental Council authority, and crimes against the wolf bloodlines. These are among the most serious offenses in pack law. Augustus's voice was ice. You systematically destroyed the lives of 18 wolves over 20 years. You drove 9 to suicide. You condemned 6 to feral madness and execution. You tore apart families. You corrupted the Continental Council. You built your power on the suffering of the most vulnerable among us. He stood. You are sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Your wolf will be permanently bound. You will never shift again. You are stripped of all titles, honors, and authority, and your name will be inscribed on the wall of shame at the Continental Council seat, so that future generations will remember what you did and ensure it never happens again. Severin's face twisted with rage. You can't. Silence. Augustus's command was absolute. Take him away. Guards hauled Severin from the hall. His protests echoed until the door slammed shut. The tribunal rose. These proceedings are concluded, Augustus said. But the work is not finished. The Continental Council will draft the Lunarisma Protection Act establishing mandatory evaluation of all pack members, criminal penalties for suppression, and sanctuary systems for wolves who have been harmed. This injustice will not stand. This will never happen again. The hall erupted in applause for the second time. Seraphine felt Morgana's arm around her shoulders, felt Theron's presence at her back, felt Elowen's weathered hand squeeze hers. Justice. Not perfect, not complete, but real. And it was enough. That night, under a full moon that hung heavy and silver over the Rockies, Seraphine's wolf finally emerged. She had gone to the gardens behind the citadel, needing space and silence to process everything that had happened. The trial, the verdicts, the beginning of real systemic change. Theron had followed at a distance, giving her space but staying close enough to help if she needed it. He knew what was coming. They both did. The shift started as warmth spreading from her chest. Her wolf no longer hiding, no longer afraid, rising to the surface with the inevitability of dawn. Seraphine gasped. The sensation was overwhelming, not painful exactly, but intense. Her bones shifted, reformed. Her skin rippled. Fur pushed through in waves of white and silver. She fell to her hands and knees, and they were not hands anymore, but paws. Her spine arched, her muzzle elongated. Her senses exploded outward in a cascade of smell and sound and sensations so rich it bordered on hallucinatory. And then it was done. The wolf that stood in the moonlit garden was small, smaller than most females. Her coat was pure white, with a silver undertone that seemed to glow in the moonlight. Her eyes were pale gold, almost amber. And the lunarisma, the soul light, blazed from every strand of fur like starlight made solid. Seraphine lifted her head and looked at herself. Paws, fur, a tail. A body that was hers and her wolf's, and somehow both at once. We did it, her wolf said. We're finally whole. We're free, Seraphine answered. Movement at the edge of the garden. Theron emerged from the shadows, and the moment he saw her, he shifted. The black wolf that appeared was enormous, heavily scarred, built for war. But he approached the small white wolf with infinite gentleness, lowering his massive head in a gesture of respect and recognition. The mate bond, fully realized, blazed to life between them. Not just connection now, but completion. Two halves of one whole. The white wolf pressed her muzzle to the black wolf's, and the world narrowed to just this moonlight fur, the warmth of another body against hers, the certainty that she was not alone and would never be alone again. Behind them in the citadel, Elowen watched from a window and smiled. And across the 5 territories, 18 wolves who had been told they were empty felt a resonance. A call, a light in the darkness that said, "You are not broken. You never were. Come home." The mating ceremony took place at Shadow Peak Citadel on the first day of autumn, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Seraphine wore white, as was traditional. The dress was simple, she had insisted on that, but beautiful flowing fabric that moved like water. Her hair was unbound, falling in dark waves to her waist, and her eyes, those pale violet eyes that had once marked her as broken, shone with joy. Theron waited for her at the altar in formal black. The scar on his face caught the sunlight, and when he smiled as she approached, Seraphine thought she had never seen anything more beautiful. They spoke the vows before 500 witnesses. Alphas and Omegas ranked wolves and servants, representatives from every pack in the territories. And when Theron placed the mating bite on her shoulder and she returned it on his, the crowd erupted in howls that echoed across the mountains. After the ceremony, there was a feast, dancing, celebration that lasted well into the night. But Seraphine's favorite moment came later, when the crowds had thinned and she found herself in a quiet corner with the people who mattered most. Morgana, who had moved to Shadow Peak and now taught at the Lunarisma Sanctuary, helping other suppressed wolves find their way back to wholeness. Elowen, who served as chief medical officer for the sanctuary system and had personally overseen the awakening of 12 more Lunarisma carriers in the past 6 months. Finian, who had been appointed head of the feral rehabilitation program and was, according to rumors, courting the russet wolf Marin with the kind of shy determination that made everyone root for them. Cadmus, who had been named Theron's official second and who stood with a glass of wine, looking vaguely uncomfortable in formal attire, but pleased nonetheless. To Seraphine, Morgana said, raising her glass, who survived the impossible and changed the world. To Seraphine, the others echoed. Seraphine felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. I didn't do it alone. No, Theron said, appearing beside her and sliding an arm around her waist. You had help, but you were the one who had the courage to believe you were worth saving. That made all the difference. Later, when the celebration finally wound down and they retreated to their private quarters, Seraphine stood at the window and looked out over Shadow Peak. The city glowed with lamplight. The mountains rose dark against the sky full of stars. What are you thinking? Theron asked, coming to stand behind her. I'm thinking about the girl who was cleaning cages 6 months ago, the one who believed she was worthless. And I'm glad she was wrong. Seraphine turned in his arms, placing her hands on his chest. I'm glad you saw what she couldn't see. I'm glad my wolf survived long enough to meet you. I'm glad too. He kissed her forehead. Though I think your wolf would have found her way back eventually, with or without me. Maybe, Seraphine smiled, but it's better this way, together. Always together, Theron agreed. And as the moon rose full and bright over the Rockies, the white wolf and the black wolf ran through the gardens of Shadow Peak Citadel, their paws striking earth in perfect synchronization, their souls bound by a connection that had nothing to do with hierarchy or rank or power, and everything to do with recognition. 2 broken pieces made whole. The Riverstone sat on a shelf in their quarters, no longer carried as a talisman but kept as a reminder. Smooth and gray and ordinary. Except it had never been ordinary any more than Seraphine had been. It had been waiting, just like her wolf, just like her. Waiting for someone to look closely enough to see what was really there. And in the end, that had made all the difference.